Have you ever just paused for a second and actually questioned that grand narrative? Have you ever wondered if the unbelievably complex, mathematically precise biological systems inside your own body are truly just the blind results of random genetic accidents over billions of years? We're always told to accept this as an undisputed fact. But what if the very foundations of this narrative are entirely missing?
All right, let's get right into it with Section 1, the truth of microevolution.
Okay, to properly unpack all of this, we first have to acknowledge what is actually scientifically proven. Microevolution is completely observable. It's a fact. It perfectly aligns with logical and scientific principles, and honestly, we see it every single day. When you look at the incredible variety of dogs out there, from a tiny little Chihuahua to a massive Great Dane, or when you look at the variations in human height, skin color, and eye color, you're seeing microevolution in action. These are small-scale changes, they're adaptations and variations of traits that literally already exist within the genetic pool of a single species. But notice the absolute crucial point here. A dog remains a dog, the foundational DNA structure, the basic blueprint of the house, remains entirely unchanged. Moving on to Section 2, the myth of macroevolution.
So here is where the authors of our sources draw a massive, completely unbridgeable line. They pivot sharply from observed science to pure imagination. Let's talk about macroevolution. This is the unobserved, assumed leap from one distinct species to an entirely new, fundamentally different organism. And guys, this is exactly where the house of cards begins to wobble dangerously. Macroevolution has never been observed, not even once. It relies purely on a massive leap of faith. The entire theory of Darwinism rests on this wild assumption that if you just string together enough of those micro-changes over millions of years, boom, you eventually get a brand new species. But as we're going to see, biology just simply doesn't work that way.
I absolutely love this kitchen analogy from Dr. Hisham Azmi because it brilliantly illustrates just how absurd that leap really is. Imagine you're in a kitchen, right? You've got flour, sugar, eggs, and oil. Now, using those exact same ingredients, you can bake a cake or you could bake a pie. That is microevolution. You're just rearranging the existing information. But macroevolution, that's assuming you can stay in that exact same kitchen with those exact same baking ingredients and somehow bake a meat shawarma. Where in the world did the meat come from? Where did the completely new genetic information come from in a closed biological system? It's a literal scientific impossibility.
Let's think about it like transportation, to really hammer this home. Microevolution is kind of like modifying a city bus. You know, maybe you paint it a different color, upgrade the seats, maybe put on some new tires. But at the end of the day, it's still a bus. Macroevolution, on the other hand, claims that through random, tiny, undirected scratches and dents over time, that rubber-wheeled bus slowly transforms into a massive freight train running on steel tracks. It's utterly illogical. Gradual, random mutations just cannot account for the sheer leap in complex, deliberate, and entirely new design that a new species requires.
So what are we actually left with here? The sources point out these glaring, gaping holes that are just conveniently ignored by the mainstream. We have absolutely zero observable speciation, meaning no one has ever actually seen one species naturally turn into another. Plus, we're dealing with mathematically impossible leaps in genetic complexity. The biological mechanisms required to just write completely new DNA code out of thin air, totally unknown and unproven. And of course, we can't forget the massive, glaring gaps in the fossil record.
But hey, you don't just have to take my word for it. Listen to Karl Popper, literally one of the greatest philosophers of science in the 20th century. He stated point blank that the theory of evolution is metaphysical and tautological. It's an ideology. It essentially defines water with water. He admitted it is not an experimental science based on actual observation. It's just a philosophical assumption that gets forcefully imposed onto the science.
Section 3, the trick of biological similarity.
Now let's tackle one of their absolute favorite arguments. Have you ever been told that because creatures have similar bone structures, it automatically proves they share a common ancestor? Let's look at why researchers are calling that a massive logical trick. Take the gray wolf. It's a placental mammal, meaning it develops its young fully in the womb. Then you have the Tasmanian wolf, which is an Australian marsupial that raises its young in a pouch. Physically, skeletally, they are identical, a perfect match. But according to the evolutionary tree itself, they share absolutely no evolutionary relationship whatsoever. Their supposed common ancestors split millions of years before either creature even existed.
And the exact same thing happens with the placental gray squirrel and the marsupial squirrel. They look identical, they jump the exact same way, yet they are totally biologically unrelated in the evolutionary timeline.
So how do Darwinists try to explain this away? They invent this logical loophole called convergent evolution. They actually claim that blind, random, undirected mutations just happen to accidentally create the exact same perfect design twice in entirely different environments millions of years apart. Seriously, if you believe that, you're ready to believe just about any myth. For the critics in our source material, the far more rational, logical conclusion is that biological similarity points to a single brilliant creator who uses perfect, efficient designs across different creatures rather than some blind, random, cosmic accident.
Which brings us to Section 4, the fossil record crisis.
Let's talk about the supposed holy grail of this entire theory, the fossil record. For over a century, we've been promised that the Earth would eventually yield these magical, missing links to definitively prove macroevolution. But the truth? It's stunningly different. Look at what Bernard Wood, one of the world's leading scientists in human origins, admits. He says there is not a single accepted fossil between humans and apes. The missing links are still completely missing, guys. All the fossils they find are either clearly apes or clearly humans. There is absolutely no continuous, gradual chain linking the two together, no matter what those nice little drawings in your high school biology textbooks try to suggest.
And if you want the ultimate genetic nail in the coffin for human evolution, here it is. 60 million. That is the actual number of genetic differences between humans and apes. Now, to put that into perspective, a study published in the Darwinian journal Genetics revealed that for just 2 coordinated beneficial mutations to naturally occur and take hold, it would take over 100 million years. Multiply that by 60 million differences, and it would take billions of years, literally way longer than the entire accepted age of the universe. The math completely and utterly obliterates the theory.
So how on earth do they keep the myth alive? Well, by stretching the truth. A lot. Take the really famous whale evolution myth, which is super popularized by science media. Step 1. They find a fossil of a 4-legged land animal, something that looks kind of like a dog or a goat, called Pachycetus or Indohaeus. Step 2. They discover a tiny little bone in its inner ear. Step 3. They assume, with a completely straight face, that this land creature evolved into a massive, deep ocean whale. But what they conveniently leave out of the documentaries is that Pachycetus couldn't even hear underwater. And that sacred ear bone they base this entire massive leap on? It's literally found in common goats.
We see the exact same wild exaggeration with the famous Egyptian fossil, Phaeamycetus anubis. It was touted by the media everywhere as the 4-legged walking whale. But you want to know the truth? No legs were actually discovered. 0. They literally just found a piece of a skull and 2 vertebrae. The media claimed it had 4 legs purely because the shape of one single spine bone resembled bones found in land mammals. It is nothing but massive, sweeping assumptions being passed off to the public as established science.
Section 5, Deception in Science Media.
And this brings us to the climax of this explainer. And honestly, perhaps the most dangerous part of this whole house of cards, the deception hiding in plain sight within pop science media and our educational systems. You see how this works? The actual scientific papers are usually pretty cautious. They use words like perhaps, maybe, or this suggests. But by the time that exact same study hits YouTube channels, flashy pop science documentaries, and university textbooks, those tentative maybes are magically transformed into absolute, undeniable certainties. Students are just brainwashed by this constant, unending bombardment. Everything gets explained exclusively through the lens of materialistic philosophy, framed as undisputed scientific fact, which completely strips away a student's ability to actually think critically. They even go so far as to manipulate the very definition of a species just to create the illusion of evolution. For example, they'll point to 400,000 types of beetles as proof of speciation, but they classify them based entirely on external looks without ever actually testing if they can interbreed. They tell us dogs and wolves are different species, yet they share the exact same genetic structure and chromosome count. They're separated only by social and geographical habits. Or get this, they classify 2 types of panda fish in Africa as totally different species just because of a slight color preference during mating. But the second scientists change the lighting in the fish tank so they all look the same, the fish perfectly interbreed. It's a classification trick, guys. It is not the creation of new genetic organisms.
So the absolutely crucial point we are left with today is this. The grand narrative of macroevolution is failing. It lacks observable mechanisms, it lacks fossil proof,
and it relies incredibly heavily on massive assumptions and media exaggerations. So what are you going to do? Will you blindly accept this materialistic house of cards narrative passed down by pop science? Or will you stay intellectually vigilant, actually look at the raw data, strip away the philosophical bias, and demand true, rigorous scientific evidence? The choice and the truth is entirely in your hands. Keep questioning everything, guys.